Hello and welcome to the program. The Council of Europe has extended asset freezes on former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych and 11 other Ukrainians suspected of embezzling state funds until March 6, 2020. The restrictive measures against one person were not extended. To discuss this, we welcome to our studio today Oleh Horbachov, international lawyer. Hello and thank you for joining us. So first question. In this list, Andrei Kluyev, the former head of Yanukovych's presidential administration, was excluded from the sanction list due to a ruling by the EU General Court last summer. The Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine has confirmed that Kluyev was excluded from the sanction list. How do you explain this exclusion from the list?
I should note that previously in July 2018 there was a ruling of General Court. This is the first instance of the European Court of Justice, which is situated in Luxembourg, and this ruling meant that Andrei Kluyev should be excluded from the sanction list, and the sanctions which were imposed against Andrei Kluyev should be lifted. These sanctions which were imposed on him on 2017.
On what grounds? Why was the ruling based about? Because he was the head of Yanukovych.
This decision is we can see this decision in open access, and there are a lot of details, but there is no any confidential information, and but we can see this that the main reason that there is no adequate communication with Ukrainian law enforcement bodies and European Council. That is why this was the reason of lifting these sanctions from Andrei Kluyev. And this was an example of bad communication between our law enforcement body, which is General Prosecutor Office of Ukraine, and European Council, because our authorities, our Ukrainian authorities did not inform European Council that the investigation against Kluyev was suspended, and that is why this is an example for Ukrainian authorities. They should improve communication with European Council in order to prevent such an examples when such sanctions against the Viktor Yanukovych, against the official high-ranking officials under the presidency Viktor Yanukovych, can lift these sanctions by means of submitting lawsuits to court.
Yeah, because it's an administrative thing, and that means that it could happen if Ukrainian law enforcement doesn't, as you say, communicate well. It could happen to other people. Basically.
Yes, there was a second example of such bad communication, because we were witnesses of lifting sanctions against the brother of Andrei Kluyev, Sergei Kluyev, and he was a year ago was also lifted from the sanctions list in February 2028. He was also lifted from the sanctions, and previously his lifting from the sanctioned list, he was also there was also recognition of his innocence, and according to ruling of European Court of Justice, there was ruling that Sergei Kluyev and sanctions against Sergei Kluyev should be lifted by European Council. That is why there is a second ruling of European Court of Justice, which means that Ukrainian authorities should improve communication, and moreover they should improve investigation procedure in order to prevent such a bad practice when such sanctions can be lifted by European Council.
Is it possible to have those two people back in the list, or should we wait for another year or for another conclusion of its investigation?
Yes, this sanctions list, as a rule, it excluded once a year. So this practice began in the 5th of March in 2014, and each year the European councils and members of European councils, they can make a decision in order to extend this period of sanctions for 1 year, or to lift the sanctions against anybody of their official ranking politicians from the ex-President Yanukovych.
Now, on the sanctions itself, so as we said, these restrictive measures and these sanctions regime are being renewed every year. How long do you think that such measure will stay against pro-Russian Yanukovych or Yanukovych cronies or Russian entities?
I think that such a regime of sanctions will be extended for each year, and I think that even after the presidential elections in Ukraine, it also will be extended, because these persons, they were responsible for abuse of power after the Maidan, and they were also responsible for embezzlement of state funds in Ukraine. That is why I think, and all lawmakers think that such a regime will be excluded for each year. But such examples, when the sanctions against Sergei Kliyev, against Andrei Kliyev were lifted, this means that Ukrainian enforcement bodies should improve their investigation. Investigation should be transparent and should be communicated to European Council about the stages of such investigations and about their criminal, all the details about the criminal proceedings against such persons.
There's another problem, which is the practicality of these sanctions and also the decisions of the Supreme Court of Justice. Yanukovych was tried for appealing for Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's been condemned for 13 years in prison. He's still hiding in Russia. How efficient can the justice, in Ukraine, can be efficient on Yanukovych, who's still hiding in Russia?
Yes, today Yanukovych is situated in the Russian Federation, and as we know, Russian Federation didn't fulfill any obligations, any international obligations, and that is why it failed to extradite Yanukovych to Ukraine.
And
this means that when Russian authorities, which are taken to power in Russian Federation, they are still taking power. That is why the procedure of extraditing Yanukovych to Ukraine cannot be fulfilled, because Russian Federation is a violator of all international obligations and of all international procedures which prescribed the mechanism of extradition.
So, if this mechanism of extradition doesn't work, how can this sentence be practical in another way? How can Ukraine pressure Russia have any kind of leverage on the situation right now?
Yes, and Ukraine should conduct the procedure of ex in absentia, and Yanukovych was recognized as guilty in committing the actions against territorial integrity, and we were witnesses of January decision of Oblonsky court, and that is why Ukrainian law enforcement bodies such as General Prosecutor Office should continue the procedure of investigation against the crimes of Yanukovych. And we also know that there is another case when Yanukovych is guilty for crimes against Maidan, and there is another criminal proceedings, and we are waiting that such a criminal decision, criminal verdict against Yanukovych will be fulfilled in the near future.
So now that's for the justice part, but like, is there any way, a way like adding his name on the Interpol wanted list, so to basically take him from Russia and extradite him where he is to be judged?
Yes, the sanctions against Yanukovych, which were imposed by European Union, they mean that when Yanukovych will be on the territory of European Union, he haven't any possibility to go to the territory of European Union, and his actives are frozen on the territory of European Union. And when this regime of sanctions is still being in place against Yanukovych, such the possibility of Yanukovych going to the territory of European Union from the Russian Federation is impossible, because this mechanism prescribes that he is prohibited to go to the territory of European Union, and also his actives on the territory of the EU are also frozen.
So now to conclude this interview, would you say that that is the best way to deal with that problem, or are there other solutions?
The best deal with this problem means that Ukrainian law enforcement bodies should continue to investigate criminal proceedings and continue such criminal proceedings against the high-ranking officials of when Yanukovych was the president, and the practice when such law enforcement bodies communicate negatively with the European Union is a bad practice, and that is why it is a sign for all our bodies to improve such a communication in order to prevent the possibility of going of Yanukovych and also his ex-policemakers under his presidency, of preventing such a possibility of going them to the European instances such as the European Court of Justice.
Well, thank you for this overview. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio today to shed light on these issues.
Thank you.
That was Oleh Horbachov, international lawyer. Thank you for watching the program, and stay tuned for the rest.